Welcome to the Content Amplified podcast, brought to you by Masset. Our goal is to help you get more from your marketing content. Each episode is a 10 to 15 minute interview with industry experts that share amazing insights to help you squeeze as much juice from your content as you possibly can. Here's today's interview.
Welcome back to another episode of Content Amplified. Today I'm joined by Jake. Jake, welcome to the show.
Hello. Hi. Thank you for having me.
Jake, I'm excited to have you here. I'm excited for the subject. I think this is going to be really, really cool. But before we dive in, the questions I love to ask guests to get to know you. One, what do you love about content? What do you love about marketing is number two. And then number three, let's get to know you just a little bit about your career background and let us get to know you.
Sure. Oh, wow. Okay. You only have 10 minutes. So I'm going to try to be short. Okay. What I like about content is the creativity aspect. Of course, marketers consider content as having performance or conversion, which I completely understand and respect, but I also believe that it needs to inform, educate, delight, spark curiosity, and all those other touchy-feely parts. Because part of the sales buyer's journey, of course, are those emotional factors. So when content can resonate with buyers on those levels, that's where I think content has a very strong role and responsibility. So
very cool.
That's what gets me excited about content. Okay, so my background is traditional public relations. So I started off in New York in the late 90s at Edelman Public Relations, which is now the largest public relations firm in the world, 38th floor, overlooking Times Square. And I worked on accounts, investment banks, technology, financial services technology. This is before fintech was a thing, before crypto was even a thing. And did that for many years, but then there was a dot-com bust. There was September 11th. And actually through the 2000s, I found myself freelancing, contracting as a content marketer. So doing traditional PR press release, reporters, following up, interviews, less and less. And instead getting more requests from marketers at financial services companies, technology, SaaS, IT companies for content, emails, blogs, website copy, a random press release, maybe that, some ghostwriting articles. So that's how I then got into content. But oddly enough, 3.5 years ago, I went back to traditional PR. And actually, in early 2021, I started as a 10-hour-a-week Upwork contractor, complete full disclosure, with a small PR firm that focuses clean energy and climate tech. It's called Technica Communications. And it was a challenge for two reasons. Number one, I hadn't done traditional PR in a long time, so I didn't even know what were the trade publications even covering energy. So I had to really think and learn on my feet. And I hadn't done a traditional PR process, press release. I hadn't done that in a while. I was also working remotely, getting into that rigmarole. So it was a lot of scrapes and bruises. But I can say 3.5 years later, I'm still there. So actually a little over a year after I started, I became a full-timer. So that firm is Technica Communications. It's about 14 people. And the clients are 100% in sustainability, renewable energy, climate tech.
I love it. Well, that's a great background, and it's really applicable to our conversation today. I'm really excited for the conversation. Today, we're going to dive into earned media. So often when we look at and talk about repurposing content, we talk about taking a really good piece of content, turning it into webinars or blog posts or social media posts. But we often kind of skip the step of saying what other publications or groups out there would maybe want this content. And how do I give it to them? How do I get in front of them? Things of that nature. So Jake, when looking at earned media, how should we start to think about this? What is earned media? Maybe for anyone who doesn't even know what that looks like, how do we start to approach it?
Sure. Okay. And again, we only have 10 minutes, so I'll try to go for the highlights, greatest hits. So earned media is basically PR, meaning you are mentioned or quoted in a news article. That has been the classic definition of a PR win or a successful PR campaign. I don't know, decades. That's earned media. Wow, you got the ink, as they used to say. Okay. Well, as we all know, the PR industry has had to deal with drastic shifts, just like the traditional media industry, like with layoffs of hundreds of thousands of journalists across the country, across the world. Okay. But like I said, 3.5 years ago, I started now in this clean energy climate tech, which oddly enough, because of all of the enthusiasm and investment in the sector, government grants, incentives, and all this other stuff, all the money that has been moved in the sector, guess who has been another beneficiary of all that has been the media industry. And so there's all of these new, shall we say, newish publications that have sprung up in the last 2 or 3 years to cover this industry. So it's been an interest. So it's like this, I want to say renaissance, but there's been an interesting enthusiasm for the media industry, which of course means, to the point, there's now additional earned opportunities in the climate tech space. So I think for the purpose of today's discussion, I'll explain or walk the listeners through, like, what would an earned repurposed piece of content look like? I think that might help out. Okay. So for example, one thing, okay, so we're talking about like content, like I said, for decades, in the 2000s, okay, you write a blog post, which is basically an article, which of course has quotes, links, research, or shall we say, you probably know this as much as I do, that some companies consider their blog as it should be as factual and valuable and informative as possible. They have high editorial standards, they have editorial guidelines, they have creative briefs, content briefs, they have a whole system in place to make sure that the content has quality. In fact, there are some companies where some of those editorial guidelines and content briefs are probably as strong as some trade publications. They may not be for the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, but for a trade publication, the tone, the word choice, is pretty strict, which is very impressive. Because I do think, and I mentioned that earlier, the higher the quality of the content, the higher the quality of conversations that you're going to have with buyers on their journey. Okay, so let's say you write one of your writers write a blog article. Okay, and then you're thinking, well, how can we get more mileage out of this? How can we repurpose it? So of course, as you mentioned earlier, what does repurposing mean? Oh, we'll make a few LinkedIn posts. We'll scrape a little bit of it to make a landing page for a webinar or something like that. But it turns out what I have found, a lot of people do not repurpose their content marketing for an earned media opportunity. And let me explain how that works. Okay. So like I said, there's all of these newish publications in the clean energy and climate tech space where they're hungry for content. They of course have their team covering news, and there's some sponsored content too, where you could write an article and then pay to have it placed. What I'm talking about is earned, 100% editorial. So there's a handful of publications that will accept these bylined articles. No money changes hands. Now, of course, they have a strict list of guidelines, okay? It has to be non-promotional. Sorry about the dog in the back. This is what happens when you work from home.
Yeah, no, you're good.
The article,
my kids are in the background too.
Yeah.
That's how it goes.
So the article, of course, has to be a certain length. They have guidelines like a paragraph cannot have more than 5 sentences, or there's certain number of links. It cannot be commercial in nature. In fact, usually the only plug a contributed article for publication can have is in the author's bio at the very bottom. It's a 2-line italicized bio, like so-and-so is the chief operating officer of such a company, with a hyperlink, and that's all you're allowed. Now, of course, some content marketers be like, well, that stinks. What the heck does just a tiny little 10-point link to the company's home? How does that serve me? All right. But again, like I said, that is a repurposed, earned opportunity. That article was already written for a blog. It was already written for something. You are now changing it a bit, adjusting it to match the guidelines, pitching it, presenting it. It's accepted, okay? And you've got free exposure for the company in a publication that probably has a newsletter distribution of 50,000. So it's free advertising. I mean, however you want to discuss it. So that would be an example of repurposing content for an earned media opportunity. Now, wait, it gets better. So every publication is different. They may go in and change and do their own editing, sometimes with a light hand, sometimes with a heavy hand. Sometimes you have to wait 2 weeks or 2 months even for the article to show up, because they have a whole calendar of when things the slots, But it turns out you're like, wait a minute, though. That publication's not the only game in town. Can I get it somewhere else? All right. So it turns out several publications will accept that non-commercial, unique article, but again, emphasis on unique. So you cannot submit or pitch or present that identical article that was already published in publication X. But if you want to now present it and hopefully get it published in publication Y, you have to change it a bit. And that's where the word repurposing comes in. All right. How do I repurpose? I change the title. I change all the H2 tags. I go in, and some team members, some more than others, or some a little differently, where we try to change about 10 to 50% of the actual words in language. Sometimes we'll change a hyperlink to a news source. Sometimes we'll add or subtract an extra sentence, okay? Where if you look at the two, you're like, okay, these are about the same concept, but they're not the same article. Instead of publication Y, we'll take this unique article, and now they will do the same thing again with the bio, with the link at the bottom. And so now you have two. In fact, I will tell you that I have worked on some campaigns for some clean energy, climate tech, sustainability companies where we have gotten 5 placements in trade publications from one blog post.
That's
so
amazing.
It is that, and that I'll tell you was something that I had been repurposing for on and off for years and years, but getting the trade press involved to do that, I thought was just fascinating. And again, like it's nothing's guaranteed. Again, there's some clients who are like, oh, well, we've been waiting for weeks. When are we going to see it? There's some impatience, and every publication's different. But I think that is a strategy that companies can certainly take a lot more advantage of.
I love it. So another question that naturally comes up for me, how do I pitch my content to these groups in a way that I'm actually going to get it accepted and published on the publication? I think that's really intimidating for people. What are some pieces of advice for that?
Okay. So it's that's a great question, by the way. And it's pitching, which is basically selling. You are selling an idea to a managing editor. Hey, here's a free article. Please publish it. Now, you're not going to exactly say that, but you have to come up with a clever, creative way that shows that it's valuable, insightful, and stuff like that. First of course, you have to do your research, shortlist the publications, finding the people inside the publication on the editorial side who make those decisions. So, of course, I'll just tell you this. You should not pitch a regular reporter on this, because that's competitive to their job. Because you're coming in saying, oh, hey, here's a free article that you wouldn't write, that you wouldn't get paid for. Okay, so don't pitch the regular reporter. As much as you may have a relationship with them for news, they would make. The person who makes that decision is often like managing editor-in-chief, that level. And sometimes for smaller trade publications, it's the publisher. Because the publisher, of course, is trying to sell advertising. So now they have free content that they can now put ads on that webpage for. Okay, so that's the first thing, is to do your homework and find out who are you even selling to. And then, of course, how do you pitch? It could be traditional email. It could be a LinkedIn message. It could be word of mouth, like if you maybe had another client that worked with that publication in some capacity. But and then when in your pitch, believe it or not, in your email or LinkedIn message, you have to start with an idea, like such and such is going on in the world. And if this doesn't change by this, and then you casually mention how company XYZ has an article to address this.
I love it.
But you don't, but here's nothing too. Another sort of tactic. Don't send the draft in the pitch.
Okay.
Because, of course, like number one, if you send they could just take it and not tell you. And then you find out the hard way that the thing went to print. And you're like, you want to whet their appetite. In other words, you want to whet their appetite and then send.
Yeah.
So that's another like sort of tactical thing we found. But, there's, just like anything with PR, which is why it frustrates a lot of traditional advertising and marketing people, is that, PR is more art than science. So pretty much you have to keep doing the art that works.
I love it. A lot of industries have podcasts. They have influencers on social media accounts, things like that. What I find interesting is exactly what you just described is also the same way to get exposure on other people's podcasts, other people's websites, other people's social media accounts. If you want to pay thousands of dollars to someone who has 100,000 followers on LinkedIn, great, they will take that paycheck anytime. Same with trade publications or anyone. But what they don't get that often is, I know your audience would love this story, and it talks about this, this, and this, and I wrote the article. Would you like to collaborate with me? and I've got all this first party data or whatever it may be, so you can't get there without me, kind of an idea. Are you seeing the same process for like those kinds of groups as with traditional publish and trade magazines and media?
The answer is yes, but it's a tougher sell for the simple reason that those podcast producers and newsletter publishers and influencers are one man, one women bands who are doing it all. Okay. And they could just about get their newsletter over the finish line or that podcast published, like without worrying, I have to get back to that guy who had that really interesting idea. I should follow up with him. So it's really just a bandwidth issue. Some of the smaller podcasts, if you remember 2021, do you remember Substack was all the rage?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now Beehive is like the Pepsi. Wait, so Substack is the Coke and Beehive is the Pepsi, I guess you call it, right, in the industry, which is great. I think, newsletters have been around since Hotmail was sold to Microsoft in 1997 or something. Remember those newsletter? There used to be newsletter conferences or email conferences. Those were fun, right? Anyway, so I think with the smaller publishers, it could be a little challenging because they're overworked and they're stretched, but there's definitely more value. When you go to a larger publisher, I mentioned all these trade publications. Well, guess what? They have conferences. They have webinars. They have podcasts. They have also, and of course, they're trying to sell sponsorships to that stuff too. So sometimes you pitch them and you get the response is, oh, well, we could do this for $500, something that's reasonable. It's less than, it wouldn't be 5,000, it will only be 500. And I will say this is something else, and I think it's worth mentioning in this conversation I've earned media, is that the word PR or the initials PR for public relations mean different things to different people. And that is something that I started learning in the mid 2000s when traditional IT SaaS companies just started owning everything, doing all their demand gen, just keeping it all in-house. But PR means different things to different people. And I've had clients in Europe. I've had clients in other parts of the U.S. in different industries with all different levels of maturity and experience in dealing with PR. There are some clients I've worked with where they think that PR is paid and earned at the same time. That if you are going to write an article and you're having trouble placing it and the publication's asking for $250, pay the $250. Don't make a big, don't make a friggin' big deal about it. Just pay it. I had a client in Finland, a mobile device management. It was mobile security software. And when they hired, again, went from contract to full time. And then they're like, Jake, and just let us know what your monthly budget for media spend would be. And I was like, do they think I'm doing the advertising too? So no, someone else was doing the Google ads. Someone else was doing paid media. But when they gave me a budget, it's because they knew, even in Europe, that some publications had a resistance to pitches. And so sometimes to get something over the finish line, you had to pay a little bit.
Yeah, I love that.
I just want to mention that because that should not shock anyone. It shouldn't shock the PR people. And you'd be surprised. I've had clients where we come back to them and said, I know you want to be in, for example, you've heard of the industry Dive family of newsletters. There's like dozens of them right now, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. They're notorious for not accepting earned, for not accepting free. They want to move you into a paid content, okay? So we'll come back to clients and look, we've tried for a month. The only opportunity is paid. They're like, okay, fine. Send the purchase order, So I just think that has to be part of a conversation or be at the table. It should not, people can't just shut the door on that.
Yeah, I love that. Well, Jake, this has been super informational. It definitely puts a whole new tone to content repurposing. And I think it will open a lot of people's eyes to how can I get more value? What are some earned opportunities? And really, how do I get that exposure? And there's a laundry list of benefits for getting into these different groups, the thought leadership, the branding, the SEO, the link value, all of that good stuff comes from this. I love it. It's been a great conversation. If anyone wants to reach out and continue the conversation online with you, how and where do they find you?
Well, of course, they can just find me on LinkedIn. I am the only Jake Wengroff on the entire LinkedIn network.
Love it. Perfect. Well, Jake, again, thank you for the time today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. This was a great conversation.
Thank you for listening to the Content Amplified podcast. Please subscribe and leave us a review. And for additional ways to get more out of your content, visit our website at getmasset.com. That's getmasset.com. And tune in next time to the Content Amplified podcast.